Hello everyone. It's been a while since I wanted to make a short video to share with you the tips that I give to my students for them to improve the quality of their essays. I only teach A2 economics, so I am mostly talking about paper 4 and mostly the essays. It's very difficult for them, very challenging to write essays, and it can also be very challenging for teachers to know how to help the students improve the quality of their essays. So in this video, I will give you 10 tips that I give my students to help them, write better essays. I want to mention before that I'm not a CI examiner, and I have never been, so I don't exactly know what are the expectations. I do have some experience writing academic essays, so I believe that the tips that I give my students are relevant, helpful. You may disagree with the advice that I give them. If it's the case, please let me know and explain. Anyway, I hope that this short video is going to help you. I will try to make more in the future, so if you have any request on a particular topic that you would like me to cover, then feel free to contact me. Alright, let's go! In my opinion, the format of the essay is an extremely important parameter. The reason is because it can affect the state of mind of the examiner. Marking essays for days is not the most exciting activity in the world. It's boring and exhausting. As a student, you want to have the examiner on your side, which means that you want to make his or her job as easy as possible. You want to make sure that when the examiner is marking your essay, that he or she is in a good state of mind, in a good mood. And I'm convinced that the format of the essay can influence the mood of the examiner. So you are going to tell me, yeah, but this should not have any influence on the final grade because the examiners should be objective, they have a mark scheme. So regardless of their state of mind, the grade should be the same. Okay, ideally this should be the case, but examiners are human beings, of course, and their state of mind influences the final grade that they give to the students. Maybe it's just a marginal change, okay? It probably depends from one examiner to the other. But if we agree that this may have an influence, well, again, as a student, why not make an effort? Why not make an effort in order to, improve our chances to have the highest possible grade? So how can we improve the format of the essay? There are a few tips. First, the handwriting. Obviously, some students have a terrible handwriting, and I have to struggle to decipher each and every single word. Of course, when you mark these types of essays, you are in not a very good state of mind, not in a very good mood, obviously. And regardless of the content, I have to admit that this sometimes probably influence the final grade, and the students may receive a lower grade than what they would have received if the handwriting would have been much better or had been much better. Second is the use of paragraphs. The use of paragraphs is really helpful because it helps identifying the structure of the essay. It makes it obvious when you finish one point, when you start a new one, when you finish your introduction, your part 1, your part 2, when you start your evaluation. So it gives some structure, and it makes it way easier, again as an examiner, to identify the chain of reasoning and the overall structure of the essay. Third point, diagrams. The format of the diagrams. Whether or not students use a ruler, whether or not diagrams are big enough, whether or not they are clear, easy to read. I will make a special video about diagrams, so I'm not going to say too much right now. And last, the presence of erasures. There are some students who start a sentence, change their minds, delete everything or erase everything, start again, oh, they changed their mind again. And overall, the whole essay, at the end of the day, is just super messy. I'm really convinced that the format of the essay sends a signal to the examiner that will affect his or her state of mind. So overall, you should tell your students to make everything in their power to improve the format of their essay. Handwriting, paragraphs, diagrams, format of diagrams, and think before they start a sentence so they don't have to delete everything. 4 points. Students should plan their answer. I know that they only have on average 45 minutes to write an essay. It's not very long, but I'm always scared when I see that they start writing right away. I just release the question paper, they pick an essay question in like a matter of seconds and they start writing right away. I find that extremely risky. Why should students plan their answers? I think they should spend at least 5 minutes planning their answer. First, in order to identify all the points that are relevant to the essay questions, to make sure they don't forget anything and that they will be able to organize all those points in a coherent way. The problem that many students have is that they start writing, okay, everything so far so good, and then they realize that they forgot something. So they include it anyway, but it's too late. They have already moved on to some other point, and obviously it doesn't make sense to include it afterwards, but they still do it. They still do it because they don't want to lose points. Yeah, it's important, so I should include it. But then the whole structure of the essay becomes really difficult to identify. Very difficult to understand the overall chain of reasoning. Another reason for which it's important to plan is to make sure that we actually answer the question. It sounds stupid, but many of my students don't actually answer the question. When you plan beforehand, you can ascertain that at the end of the day, when you will conclude your essay, you will have provided an answer. The problem with many students is that they start writing, they start answering the question, and then they just drift away. And they reach a conclusion that is not even related to the initial question. So overall, planning the essay question beforehand is really safe. It's scary because you have the feeling that you are wasting time. You don't start writing right away. It might be scary. But again, it's super safe. It's much better, in my opinion, to write a shorter essay with a coherent structure and that will actually answer the question rather than starting writing right away, including points in an order that does not necessarily make sense, with the risk of drifting away and reaching a conclusion that is not related to the initial question. In order to make a point, to put forward an argument, there are 3 steps that the students should take in order for the point to be coherent and clear. The first point is what I call the statement. A statement is just one simple sentence where you state your point. Okay, what are you going to say? What's the idea? The second stage is to explain your point. You have stated it, okay, so then we want to understand how this works, so explain it. as soon as you have stated and explained your point, you need to illustrate it. Overall, there are two ways you can illustrate your points. First, using an example. It can be a real-life example with actual data, an actual case. This can be an hypothetical example, even though I think real-life examples are, well, more interesting. Or it could be a diagram. A diagram can also be a form of illustration. Let me give you an example. I'm going to use my slide, and I'm going to read the example that I have to explain how we divide a point into three stages. So it's about externalities. Stage 1, statement. First, positive consumption externalities lead to a partial market failure in which there is an under-provision of the good or service. That's my statement. That's what I'm going to develop in this paragraph, because of course each point should be one paragraph. Okay, so my point has been stated. Now let's explain it. Indeed, so make sure you use this type of word, right? First, indeed. Indeed, in the presence of an external benefit, the social benefit exceeds the private benefit, so the price mechanism fails to provide consumers with sufficient incentive to purchase the good or service. Okay, I explain why, when we have a positive consumption externality, why we have an under provision. That's the explanation. Now I understand. And final stage, the illustration. So first I should draw a diagram. Again, I will make another video about diagrams, but I should use a diagram to show how it works. And I can take a real life example. Here's mine. For instance, okay, always start your sentences with these type of words. I don't know how we call that in English. So we know what's coming. We know what to expect. We know that the sentence will be an illustration. For instance, an individual learning a foreign language enjoys a private benefit, enhanced ability to communicate, but she also generates a network external benefit in the sense that all speakers of that language are now able to communicate with an additional person. That's a real-life example of a positive consumption externality. When we put all that together, the statement, the explanation, the illustration, the point is complete. It's coherent. We have everything we need to understand the point that we want to put forward. Students should always define the key concepts that they use in their essays. And there is a very simple reason for that. It's an examination. The job of the examiner is to tell whether the student has a good knowledge and understanding of economics. So if you use economics terminology in your essay, but if you don't define the words, the concepts, how can you expect the examiner to make the difference between a student who has really understood the concept and one student that only knows the word but might be completely wrong about the true meaning of this word? Sometimes students believe that they should start their essay with the long list of definition. All the words, all the concepts that I will need in my essay, I will just use that as my introduction. Let's define everything, so then we are clear for the rest of the essay. I don't think it's a good idea. This is not the way an introduction should be written. It's very long and boring if you start your essay with a long list of definitions. Instead, you should define the key concepts when you use them. As soon as you need to use a keyword in the essay, provide a definition, but not before. This would be hard to understand if you start your essay by a definition and then you use this definition like 2 pages later. This would not make much sense. One question that we can ask ourselves is, okay, but then how detailed the definition should be? Well, it depends. It depends whether this concept really is at the core of the essay question, or if it's something that is, let's say, remotely related to the essay question. For example, if you write an essay about efficiency, well, the definition of efficiency itself, allocative, productive, and so on, are super important. So you should not rush this definition. You should take time to define it properly. But let me try to find another example. So again, if you write an essay about efficiency, so you are going to define efficiency, market failure, of course, the different causes of market failure. You are probably not going to give a very, very detailed definition of, let's say, I don't know, a public good. You're not going to spend 2 paragraphs talking about what it means to be non-rival, what it means to be non-excludable, what is exactly the free rider problem. Okay, you need to define what is a public good, obviously, but clearly, if the essay really is about efficiency, the concept of public good is related, but you should not spend as much time defining public good than the concept of efficiency itself. The point is that everything should be defined. Students should be careful when using abbreviations. For example, it's tempting, right, to use AD for aggregate demand, AS for aggregate supply, what else, SRPC for short-term Phillips curve, and so on. And most of the time, it's fine because all textbooks use the same abbreviation, so it's not ambiguous. And when students actually write the CIE exam, they use the abbreviation and the examiner knows what it refers to. But sometimes teachers use their own abbreviations, and I have to admit that I do that myself. And my abbreviations, the ones that I use, might not be consistent with what is used in textbooks. So we use that the whole year in class, so the students, they know what it refers to. It becomes automatic when they see this particular abbreviation, that they understand what it means. So they use it when they write the official CIE paper 4. But then the examiner might not know what it is. And then it can be a disaster, because if you make a whole point using abbreviations and the examiner has no idea what you're talking about, it's a big problem. Simple example of what I do. When we talk about tax systems, we talk about the average tax rate and the marginal tax rate. So I use ATR for average tax rate and MTR for marginal tax rate. I'm not sure it's very common. Maybe you use this abbreviation yourself, but frankly, I can't recall right now having seen any textbook using this type of abbreviation. Maybe I forgot. But what is for sure, it's probably not very widespread. So that's a problem, and you should tell the students to be careful with that. One way to fix this problem, or to make sure it doesn't happen, is to require the students to define the abbreviations the first time, of course. So let's say that I start my point about the tax systems and I want to talk about the marginal tax rate and average tax rate. So I can write something like, we should make a distinction between the average tax rate, open brackets, ATR, and the marginal tax rate, open brackets, MTR. And I tell the students to do that for everything, even aggregate demand. First time they want to use the concept of aggregate demand, they write it in full letters. Aggregate demand, open brackets, AD. Again, it's safe. I find this safe, and it also shows that the students knows what the abbreviation refer to. So it's simple, it's safe, so why not do it? Students should use economics terminology. Sometimes I read essays in which they do talk about economic concepts, but they never mention the actual term. One example, I will have a student writing about a situation where people might have low incentives to work because there are high unemployment benefits and like a high progressivity rate in the tax system. Okay. But they never talk about the underlying concept, the poverty trap. I can have some students writing about a situation where people don't make good consumption decisions because they face an information failure. They don't have an accurate information about the true benefit of consuming a good or service. But they will never mention the word merit or demerit good. It's a big problem because it shows that the student lacks of precision. It is a lack of precision that maybe his or her knowledge is quite weak. And again, it's an economics test, and we have in economics our own language, and we need to use that language. Students need to use that language to signal that they have acquired this vocabulary. So make sure you tell the students to always use the right economics terms. Students should write short sentences. I often tell my students that one sentence should say one thing, and they don't listen to me. Usually their sentences start by saying one thing, and two, and three, and four, and five, and the sentence goes on forever, and it becomes extremely difficult to just get the meaning of the sentence overall. It's even more complicated to get the meaning given that they are not native speakers. So sometimes the structure of the sentence is a little bit, awkward. Sometimes they use some words as it or they, and you forget, okay, but you don't even remember what this refers to. So the meaning of the sentence becomes impossible to get. I tell them that each sentence is like a small step towards your conclusion or your evaluation. Make it short. One sentence, one point. And each sentence has to have a clear connection with the next one. When the steps are sufficiently small, it's very easy to move from one sentence to the other. The connection is obvious, and the chain of reasoning is very easy to get. And reading the essay is comfortable. And again, this can affect the mood of the examiner. If sentences are too long, the steps are too high, and we might just fail to move from one sentence to the other, or let's say to understand the connection between those two sentences. So again, short sentences really improve the quality of the essay, the ease with which we can read it and understand the logical connection between the different components of the essay. This point is really important to me. It might sound a little bit weird, and maybe you will disagree with me, but that's what I have always done myself at the university when writing academic essays. I always made the assumption that the person who was going to mark my essay knew barely nothing about the topic itself. Why? Because if you have in mind that the examiner is a teacher, is an economics teacher, for example, you will not have very strong incentives to explain things clearly. You might not even want to define the keywords because, well, after all, the examiner is a teacher, he or she knows what this is. Why bother? Why should I waste time defining things? And even if I don't explain, even if I just state a point, well, he knows. He knows. I don't have to explain it. I don't have to illustrate it. If I talk about a negative externality, he knows it's pollution and he knows how this works. It's a terrible mistake. It's a terrible mistake because when doing that, we don't show our knowledge, we don't show our understanding, we don't show our capacity to apply our knowledge using real life examples. So again, in my opinion, it's very important to assume that the examiner doesn't know the answer, that he or she is someone who actually you met somebody randomly, and this person has never studied economics before and has asked you a question. And the question is the essay question. And you, as the student, you have some economics training, some economics knowledge, and you try to explain, well, to answer the question. It can be an explanation, it can be a discussion, the different command words. And of course, if this person that you've met doesn't know anything about economics, you will be forced to be very clear, to define any keywords, of course, otherwise this person will never understand, to use examples, to apply your knowledge, to be able to allow your points to be clear, because this is what examples are made for, to be able to illustrate the points, to make them easier to understand. So this assumption, assuming the examiner has never heard about economics before, is going to help you structure your essay better, explain things better, making sure you don't, it's going to make sure you don't forget to define keywords. And overall, I do believe that it's a very important parameter that will contribute to improve your essays greatly. Students should use diagrams as soon as they have the opportunity to. Many reasons for that. First, you know the sentence, one picture is worth 1,000 words. Diagrams are a good way to summarize information. With just a very quick look at the diagram, there is a lot of information that we can acquire. Again, when we go through the essay, it's quite fast. It's a fast way to transmit information to the examiner. It's also a skill. Using diagram is definitely something that belongs to the toolbox of the economist. And you should show the examiner that you know how to use this tool. Again, it's an examination. You are here to show your abilities. I will make a special dedicated video about diagrams, because there are many things that needs to be shared about diagrams. For those who have used or seen my slides, you may know that I am the diagram freak. And I use diagrams a lot when I teach, and I very often see that students very poorly use diagrams in their essays, and I'm sure that it's very easy to improve. Some things are difficult to improve, but improving the quality of the diagrams is relatively easy, and I do believe it can make a big difference. So I'm not going to say too much now, because again, there will be a dedicated video, but the format of the diagram is very important. The timing of the diagram, when to use a diagram, matters a lot, and most importantly, the comment. Because you show something, this is a diagram, but you need to explain, okay, what is it supposed to show? So you prove the examiner that not only you know how to draw the diagram, but you know what it means, and you know how it works. So it's extremely important. I'll say more about that later. I might repeat myself a little bit because I have already talked about paragraphs, not diagram, paragraphs in the previous point about the essay format. But I really wanted to make a special point about it because I think it is really important. And because I know that many students don't use paragraphs very well. Actually, some of them don't use paragraphs at all. They just write the whole essay as a single paragraph. It's not a good habit, of course, because paragraphs, they have a very important role in an essay. They signal the structure of the essay. They help to identify the structure of the essay. When you start a new paragraph, when you skip a line, you send a signal to the reader that says, okay, I am done talking about this point, and now I am going to talk about something else. So it's very reassuring when you are a reader, when you see that, because it helps to set your mind right. You know where you are when you read the essay. Okay, this is done, I'm going to start something new. When everything is just one big paragraph, you don't really know where you are. It can be very confusing. It's very difficult to identify the structure of the essay, to follow the chain of reasoning, and paragraphs have this great advantage of making that very clear. Something else about paragraphs, let's assume that we have some kind of discussion essay. The typical structure of a discussion essay would be a short introduction that sets basically what the essay will be about, what is the issue. The first part where you will consider the pros of something, or you will consider one side of an opinion, and then a second paragraph what you will consider the cons or the other side of the opinion, something like that, and some kind of evaluation to conclude your essay. Something that I find very important is at the beginning of your second and third paragraph, when you develop the pros and the cons, or one side and the other side, it's very important that you start your paragraph with one sentence that is going to basically announce that the content of this particular paragraph. So for example, if you have, say, an essay which is about discuss whether or not progressive taxation is the best way to reduce income inequality. Okay, so you can have a first paragraph, well, after the introduction, a first paragraph in which you will explain all the benefits of progressive taxation, how it can effectively reduce income inequality. So this paragraph should start by a sentence like, first, I will explain that progressive taxation can effectively reduce income inequality. Okay, so now our mind is set. We know that in this paragraph, we will consider, let's say, the pros of progressive taxation in that particular matter. At the end of your first paragraph, when you are about to start to consider the other side, the limitations of progressive taxation, or maybe the other policy instruments that we can use, you should write some kind of sentence that makes the transition between the two paragraphs. Something that usually starts by however. However, progressive taxation has some limitations, or might not be the best policy instrument if you want to develop other policy instrument. Something that really sends a signal, say, okay, now we are completely moving to something new. And again, it helps to set the mind of the reader. It helps to anticipate what's going to happen, and to say, hey, we are here. We are here in the essay. It provides guidance and is very reassuring. And finally, when you are about to evaluate, again, some sentence that says that, right, so what happens when we combine everything? That can start by, I don't know, overall, whether or not progressive taxation is the best policy instrument, depends on a number of factors. Okay, that's short sentence that basically will announce your evaluation, and then you can write your evaluation. So I think those short sentences really help improving, not really improving the structure, but just make it more apparent, just to help identifying your structure, and it makes reading the essay much easier.